I think it's
no,
it's 168.
please.
It's 168. It's 168.
I'm like 90% sure that's correct.
I checked.
Yes.
I went to the bar.
Okay.
And I checked.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 168 of I Wish You Were Dead, a podcast about things that used to be alive. My name is Mike. I know for a fact that Fia is here. I don't yet have confirmation that Gavin has rejoined the broadcast. But Fia, how the hell are you?
I'm good, besides the fact of my two good buddies just not believing in me for knowing what number episode this is.
Whoa!
Whoa!
I reject that so hard. No, Gavin, you go back to mute, all right?
Okay.
So, all right, we had, we were texting each other, yesterday about how we were going to cut down on the banter at the beginning of the show and everything, and now we're here. And I'm all about this. What had happened was, I said, I don't know, because I'm the one that does the intros for the show. God knows why. And I didn't know what number we were at. And Gavin and Fia were talking over each other, and I think Gavin said, I'm 90% sure it's 168. And then Fia is like, no, I checked. It is 168. And somehow now I was the one doubting Fia.
Yeah, I said it was 168. Gavin was like, yeah, I'm pretty sure that's right. And I was like, no, I'm 100%
Gavin intentionally
confident.
took himself off of mute.
Yes, I did.
To be able to say, I'm only 90% sure that Fia is correct. Gavin is the one here that we need to be directing our vitriol at.
I think that's fair. I'm not gonna lie. I can accept that.
Well, anyways, so that's how my night's going.
I believe you also have some other news to tell us about your night, Fia, and the weather around you.
Yeah, it do be storming. It do be storming pretty hard, so I might lose a little bit of power. I might be popping in and out, but I'm gonna try my darndest to be here. I'm pretty sure there's some hurricanes coming through in the next couple of weeks. I don't really know. I just kind of live and wait.
Just hurricane by vibes.
Yeah.
As long as the vibes are good, there is no hurricane.
Yeah, exactly.
It's if you don't test for COVID, there won't be any COVID cases.
It's different than that, I would say.
Is it?
However, if you're testing more for autism, that actually doesn't change the rate at how much autism there is. And we're back.
Topical conversation.
Back. Show is back. All right, I think this is where someone does housekeeping or something. I don't even remember.
I'm ready.
Yeah.
I'm ready. So I'm back, guys. Don't forget to rate the show on whatever platform you listen to us on, and to follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube to give us feedback about the show and any future topics you would like to hear on the pod. If you would like to be a guest on the show, which we always appreciate, please be sure to fill out the guest form, and all that stuff can be found in the show notes. Gavin and/or Mike, do you know what the next episode topic is?
Well, it's not going to be a mic because it's not a zero. So next episode will
Mike
be
never knows what the next episode is, regardless of who's hosting it.
And I'm going to be honest. When Mike was talking about me being muted at the beginning, it's because I was still currently finishing this episode. So no, I do not know what next episode is.
Nice, and that's okay.
So Gavin, if you need to go back on mute, me and Fia can actually begin the meat of this episode. We'll just start riffing back and forth on whatever.
Mike, what is today's episode topic?
I have no idea what today's episode is.
I know, that is kind of one of the whole shticks of the show.
Also, but it's not a shtick is the thing. It's the same thing with the fact that I don't know your child's name. And I'll tell you what, Gavin accidentally told us his child's name before we started recording. Honest to God, I don't know what it is.
I want to be clear. I'm not keeping it a secret from them. This is purely a Mike thing.
Does it start with the letter L?
It does.
Okay,
which
so that part's
as we've established, the L is little baby Igneous.
Of course.
Yes.
So, but yes, all that wonderful housekeeping things that Fia said. Fia does not have a Seagrass corner for us today because she's very busy with grad school. It's field season.
I actually do, though.
Oh, okay. I thought you said that.
Gavin, would you stop telling Fia?
I am so sorry, Fia.
I understand this is Trump's America, but we can still let Fia talk here. Boy, I'm on a roll today.
I'm just gonna mute myself until you guys handle your intro segments.
Don't even worry about it.
Here we go, Fia. let's learn some cool stuff about some seagrass.
Yeah, so today on Seagrass Corner, we're actually going to not talk about seagrass. We're going to talk about a macroalgae that is my favorite macroalgae. It is called Caulerpa ashmeadii.
Can I ask a question before you even really get going?
Yeah.
How many macroalgae are there for you to have a favorite? Like, is this like your favorite of 2, or is there like a million of them?
A million of them.
Okay, that's incredible.
There's so many. I mean, I can't tell you a number right now. I could tell you that in my region where like I'm in the seagrass and I'm looking at these macroalgae, we get probably about 20 different species of macroalgae that are like living in the seagrass beds too.
Mm-hmm.
So, but there's tons of them everywhere. Fun fact.
There's plenty to choose from. Tell me about this one.
Wait, what?
I said there's plenty to choose from. Plenty of macroalgae. Yeah. Tell me about this one here.
So macroalgae, they're algae, but they're like bigger. Macro, bigger. Kelp, for example, is also a macroalgae. So this Caulerpa ashmeadii, they are unusual because they only consist of one cell with many nuclei, making them among the biggest single cells in the world, which I think is really cool.
One cell with many nuclei? That goes against everything I learned in 10th grade biology.
Yeah, well, macroalgae are cool. So,
all right, I'm in.
Referring the name Caulerpa is like referring to the habit of its thallus, which means stem that creeps, from the ancient Greek callus, which means stalk, and herpo, which means to creep. So Caulerpa.
You said phallus, right?
No, I said phallus with a TH.
Okay. All right, that's a big difference.
Yes, it is. Anyways, this macroalgae is my favorite because it's large and feather shaped, and it has like a very striking appearance, and it's very fun to play with in your fingers because it's kind of like jello-y, and it's often used in aquariums for aesthetics and qualities like nutrient cycling.
You mentioned that it's aesthetically pleasing a couple of times. Like what does it look like? How would I know I'm looking at this particular macroalgae?
Okay, so imagine a feather.
Done.
Like a big feather.
Okay, like the size of my face?
Like lengthwise, but like long and skinny. And then
long and skinny.
And then like instead of it having a lot of really like fine little hairs, it's like more abstract where it's like got chunky thick segments that come off the side, and it's like it's like flat like a feather where it's like it's only coming out of the two sides, and there's just like a bunch of like bright green stalks that come out of it. And yeah, that's pretty much it. Is green. It's feather-like.
I know you talked about it before. Like, what does, if I was to touch it, what would it feel like?
Jello. It feels like very gelatinous. If you try to squeeze it, it doesn't pop or anything. It's just kind of like spongy, jello-y.
Spongy, jello-y. Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah. And so that's Caulerpa ashmeadii, or as I like to call it, Cash.
Cash, funnily enough, that's actually a wonderful transition for me if you're all set.
Yeah, I am. What you got?
So before we get to today in history, Fia mentioned Cash. One reason that I may or may not have some issues recording today is that I currently have a foster dog. His name is Cashew. Call him Cash a whole lot. Without going too deep into it, he's like one of the best dogs I've ever had. He's wonderful. I love him, and I need to get him adopted because, dear God, I can't take him. So if anybody here is looking for like the best pit bull you've ever met in your life, send an email to the show, and we will figure something out here. With that out of the way, and so if I have to leave at some point, it's because he's making noise in the cage, which he shouldn't do because he's very well behaved.
Well, that's good.
Moving on from that to today in history. This is, of course, October 1st in history. And I picked a baseball one here for a couple reasons. I'm trying to ignore whatever is happening with the New York Mets. As we're recording this, it is Saturday. The Mets have won, and the Reds are in the middle of playing. I will not bore anybody with all the permutations. However, I need the Cincinnati Reds to lose. So fingers crossed for that happening. You, dear listener, already know just how sad I am as a Mets fan. But on October 1st, 1961, New York Yankees outfielder Roger Maris became Major League Baseball's all-time home run leader when he hit his 61st home run.
Whoa.
He broke the record that was held by FIA. What baseball player do you think held the record before Roger Maris for most home runs in a single season?
Babe Ruth.
Babe Ruth! Well done!
Heck yeah.
He hit 60 home runs in a season. Roger Maris hit 61. That record has since been broken a couple of times by a couple of guys who did or are very highly suspected to have done steroids, which I don't personally care about, but other people do. Aaron Judge, who plays for the New York Yankees now.
All right.
And this season, a guy named Cal Raleigh, who plays out in Seattle, has, at time of recording, I believe he's at 60 home runs, playing as a catcher. Again, I don't want to get too deep into the particulars here, but that is one of the more remarkable things that has ever happened as a catcher hitting 60 home runs. It has been truly a remarkable season for Cal Raleigh, for a whole lot of people. Not the Mets, though. Mets are barely hanging on by a thread.
Yeah.
That is today in history. That is 1961 in baseball history.
Very cool.
Gavin, at this time, I, as a white man, have the authority to tell you that you're allowed to unmute at this point, and we can begin the episode.
Oh boy, that is so very kind of you. Also, I just thought it was neat that it was 61 home runs in the 1961 season. I just like that math. That makes my brain.
You would think I would have noticed that? Absolutely not.
That makes my brain happy.
It does.
Anywho, you know what you need to play baseball?
Balls.
Wood.
Oh.
And I'm specifically mentioning the bat that you use to hit the ball with, Mike. So
I'm left for it. Just no hesitation.
I mean, technically, yes, you do also need baseballs to play baseball.
That's not what Fia said.
No, but I'm taking it as how I believe she meant it. So yes, today we are talking about wood.
Damn, I love you guys.
Love you too, buddy.
Love you too.
So, wood is one of those things that just kind of feels weird explaining what it is because it is so ubiquitous to just life as a human person. Wood, as you probably hopefully know, is a very common material. We make a ton of stuff out of it, from houses to tools to
babies,
to paper to art. Sculptures and things like that. We use wood for, think of anything. Wood is probably involved in its manufacture or use, almost certainly. Even if it's just the instructions that, what the instructions are printed on, or the packaging, cardboard comes from wood. So,
or the facility is made out of wood,
or the house that you are opening or using said product in is, built from wood. And historically, it's been even more important, recently, in grand scheme of human history, very recently, we've replaced a lot of our wood usage with other materials like metals and plastics. But for, a very long part of human history, we built basically all of our houses out of it, unless you lived in a place without a lot of wood, like the Arctic. But even more importantly than that, it's been our main source of fuel for fire. So basically the entire time we've consistently used fire, so before Homo sapiens was even a thing. So wood is just very important to everything about humanity.
Is there a reason, you just saying it like that made me think about it, why wood is always the primary fuel for fire? Are there other options that I'm not thinking of? It always just kind of seemed like it was both the best option and the only realistic option.
It's readily available is probably the first thing.
You
especially
could use other
back.
Plants.
Yeah, that's true.
Grass.
But it burns much. Other plants burn much faster.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And don't produce as much heat. If you put on pine needles on a fire, yeah, it'll make it get real big for 10 seconds. but that's not a good way to sustain a fire. There's a lot of hydrocarbons in wood, but they're also like fairly resistant to being burned, which is what makes it burn for longer. So it's readily available, and it makes a consistent heat for a fairly long time. That's just purely me guessing, but
no,
Sure.
I agree.
Okay.
That makes sense.
But yeah, so everybody hopefully should be fairly familiar with the concept of wood. But what is it? What is wood? And so this is an episode that I thought would be much more complicated than it ended up being.
Okay.
As a kind of a running joke on the channel, I don't like plants. They scare me. They're very complicated. I don't like them. I'm an animals person, and especially a vertebrate person. So plants, I don't like. But I was pleasantly surprised. Obviously, anything is way more complicated. Anything can be as complicated as you want it to be. You know, we could get into all the detailed chemistry of wood. We're not going to do that. But basically, wood is... It has two main jobs. One is what you think of it doing, giving support to the plant. You think of a tree, it is big and tall and sturdy because of wood. That's why we use it to build stuff with. The other job that probably isn't very familiar to most people, because we don't really use it for this, is that it is very good at transporting water for the plant.
Mm-hmm.
That is how the rest of the plant gets water and nutrients from the soil.
Makes sense.
And so the wood is part of the plant called the xylem. That's basically sort of half of the plant's circulatory system. Think of it sort of like how we have veins and arteries. Kind of similar. So the xylem brings water and nutrients from the roots underground up to the rest of the plant. The phloem brings the sugars and other things made by photosynthesis from the leaves to the rest of the plant. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
And so the wood is part of the xylem from the ground up. And I thought wood was going to be like composed of a more like complex concoction of materials and molecules, but for the most part, it's pretty much just three.
Okay.
So the first one makes a lot of sense if you know anything about like plant biology at all. Cellulose. Cellulose is the molecule that gives basically all plants and plant-like things their structure, even like the non-woody ones. Cellulose is what makes celery crunchy, for example. All plants and even a lot of like photosynthetic microorganisms have it in their cell walls. It's basically it's called a polymer. So, you know, sort of a conglomeration of different smaller molecules. In this case, mostly glucose, which is the typical like table sugar. They're just arranged in a way that gives like each individual cell some structure.
Mm-hmm.
Then there's hemicellulose, very similar to regular cellulose, still made up of sugars, but the sugar molecules are organized differently in the polymer. Generally, there are fewer sugars combined into one hemicellulose than into one cellulose. That's why the hemi is there. It's, you know, give or take half of a cellulose. I know, that's not one that I had ever really heard about until doing the research for this. So
I've heard about it, but I didn't think that it was like less. I thought it was like more. But
I mean, functionally, it is very similar to cellulose.
Right.
And then the third, that is more characteristic to wood specifically, is lignin. Lignin is a class of molecules, meaning that there's lots of different kinds of lignin that are all like slightly different, but are more or less the same. I'm not going to get into all the different chemistry, but for our purposes, it's basically sort of like a strong form of organic glue that fills in the gaps between the different parts of the cell walls of plants. So if you imagine like the individual cell walls as like bricks. Lignin is like the mortar if you're building a brick wall.
That's a good analogy.
Well, thank you. As far as the plant is concerned, though, the main difference between cellulose and lignin is that cellulose is hydrophilic, meaning that it can be dissolved in water, which makes sense. We dissolve sugar in water all the time. While lignin is hydrophobic and cannot be dissolved in water. And because of this, plants basically use lignin as the pathway to move water around themselves without basically disrupting and slowly dissolving the cell walls of the cells. And so because of this, like I said, it's, we think of lignin a lot with wood and woody plants, but basically all plants have lignin. It's just how much of it determines whether it's, a woody plant versus an herbaceous plant. Another just sort of helpful characteristic of lignin is that it's very rot resistant, which is why, when a tree dies, it takes forever for it to get broken down in a forest. You can walk into a forest 10 years after a tree dies and still have kind of the shell of a tree still there. Whereas, when a fern dies, it's probably gonna be there for a couple days if it was pure natural wild forest. It also sort of works as part of the immune system. If the plant senses an infection, it basically starts forming a bunch of lignin in that area to try and seal it off from the rest of the plant. That's why if you see a tree that looks like it has a tumor on the side of it, it's quick, close off that area, surround whatever's infecting us with this lignin that it might not be able to get through as easily, and then the rest of the plant will hopefully be fine.
They're just let's just get rid of this arm. We don't need it anymore.
Pretty much. And because of this function of that, how much it helps plants, across the board move water around themselves, all plants, besides mosses and some of their relatives, have lignin. Even, the non-woody ones like celery or ferns and stuff. And so wood is a mixture of those three molecules, cellulose, hemicellulose, and lignin, in varying amounts depending on the species. Generally, about 42% cellulose, so almost half, 20 to 30% hemicellulose, and the remaining 25-ish % lignin. And the reason I said lignin is more characteristic of woody plants is that, while it makes up about 25% of, the dry weight of wood, it's at most 15%, but as low as 1% the weight of herbaceous plants like celery or ferns. So while 25 doesn't sound like a lot, a quarter of wood is this lignin. In some, it's as low as 1%. Some of the really tough, technically herbaceous plants, things like sugarcane or bamboo, get a little higher than the 15. Closer to that 25%, but they're still technically not wood. Similar case for palms. That's why it's technically not correct to call them palm trees.
Because they don't have enough lignin?
We'll talk about it in just a second, but they technically are not trees.
Wait, what?
Yeah, we'll talk about it. They do have a lot of lignin, but they are not wood for one specific reason. Because wood comes from a process called secondary growth. Think of the stem of a piece of wheat that you would pick in a field. I know when I was a kid, I lived in a pretty rural area. We would find just a piece of straw and put it in our mouths while we were running around outside causing nonsense. Imagine just a piece of straw.
Okay.
The way. Or if you didn't grow up like that, think of a typical flower like a tulip or something. The way those grow is by making the currently existing stem or branches longer, or by growing new branches or leaves off of the main stem, right? So that just elongates what's there. That is primary growth. Secondary growth is increasing the diameter, like the thickness, of an already existing branch. That's what makes wood.
Mm-hmm.
And so, think of when another really good example is like a corn stalk. When that starts growing from a seed, it basically just starts growing vertically, doesn't really get much wider from top to bottom, and is pretty much the same thickness or like diameter around. And then compare that to like a sapling tree that you might buy at like Lowe's or Home Depot or something.
Like the little Charlie Brown tree.
Yeah. Obviously, that looks a lot different than, a pine tree that you might go cut down yourself to use as a Christmas tree. And it gets wider because of this process called secondary growth. And that's what makes some things that sure look a lot like trees not trees, such as palms. Asterisk there. Some palms do a weird thing that is sure a lot like secondary growth, but technically it's different. We're not going to get into it. But it is technically not correct to call palms palm trees. And in my opinion, technically correct is the best kind of correct.
What would you call them? Like a palm bush?
Just palms.
But
that's not nearly as fun. I know.
But what would you classify them as?
Yeah, that you took the words out of my mouth, Fia.
Palms.
No.
Why?
Because a tree is a category, and like a bush is a category, and like a flowering plant.
Are they though? Trees can have flowers. There are. I didn't get into this in this episode specifically because, like I said, plants scare me and it's complicated. Single species, depending on their environment, can be either bushes or trees, or I think some can even have like a non-woody form at all if it's just like not chill for them to be growing really large. Plants freak me out. So, things that as a tree might not always be a tree. Depending on their environment.
Well, I understand, but I'm disappointed in that answer.
I agree. Still, feel free to still call them palm trees, just with now a small twinge of guilt. And so this secondary growth is why if you look at like a relatively fresh cut tree trunk or branch or something, the center is often a like different color, usually darker than sort of the outer ring or so. The center is made up of mostly dead tissue, no longer growing. That is mostly just there for support. That is often called the heartwood, because it is, in the center. The ring around the outside is called the sapwood, because that's sort of the living tissue. It's the part where when you cut it, it oozes. If you've ever put like a semi-fresh log into a fire, the liquid will ooze out from like the outer ring of the log because the inside, the center, has already been dead for a while. In fact, trees can basically live without their center, that heartwood, as long as they're still like structurally stable and able to stay upright. That's why some trees just have like random hollow spots in them. Or I know, we're getting toward Halloween. That's kind of like a Halloween staple, is like a big scary tree that's hollow on the inside and dead. Trees can just kind of live like that as long as they're able to still support themselves for the most part.
That's cool.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. If you look at like a cross section of the trunk of like a palm, for example, there's very little difference from the center to the outside because they kind of just grow vertically, that primary growth, where it's just like extending what's already there. Some very last second wood distinctions that you might hear. The main one being hardwood versus softwood. This basically, I hate that this is what these terms mean. This made me quite angry.
I was trying to keep it in there. I was gonna let it go, but
not even what you're thinking at all, Mike.
Oh wait, there's more to. Okay, so continue.
like if you go to like a Lowe's or someplace, you'll see different woods, like 2x4s, described as like this one's a hardwood, this one's a softwood. It has nothing to do with how hard or soft that piece of lumber is. It basically, softwood comes from conifers like pines and spruce. Hardwood comes from flowering plants like oaks and maples. Doesn't actually mean harder or softer. For example, balsa wood is a very common wood in like woodworking and whittling. If you ever made like model cars when you were a kid, like I did, I was in Boy Scouts when I was a kid. That's usually balsa wood because it's very soft and easy to work with, but it's a hardwood. Yew is very stiff and historically has been used to make things like longbows because of that like stiff, springy quality, but it's a softwood because it's a conifer. Makes no sense. Very stupid. You'll also hear wood sort of referred to as different colors. There's like 1,000 different things called redwoods. That just varies a lot from species to species, often because of like minor inclusions in the wood or from how much resin they produce that sort of like stays in the wood. Doesn't really have much to do with like the integrity or structure of the wood at all. Okay, so that is wood. Where did wood come from? The origin of wood and lignin are kind of different, as you might have guessed, because, like I said, there are non-woody plants that have lignin. So we'll start with lignin. Earlier, I said that lignin was a class of molecules, not just like a single molecule, like glucose. Regardless of what makes glucose, the chemical formula of glucose is the same. Lignin is not like that. It is a group of similar like molecules. So this is because basically everything that makes lignin does it a little bit differently with variations in like the substructures called lignols that combine to form lignin. Imagine Legos. There are lots of different sized bricks of Legos. Those are the lignols. They can all be used in different ways to end up making the same overall structure, which in this case would be lignin. This sort of analogy will be important in a second. Lignin does not preserve well in the fossil record. It's organic, and while it is harder than leaves, for example, it is not nearly as hard as bones or like the shells of invertebrates or things. So we don't have a terrific, especially early record of lignin. However, back in 2009, so like all things considered relatively recently, lignin was found in a modern species of red algae. If you know anything about how different groups of life are related, red algae are not very closely related to plants at all. This made people really take a closer look at the origins of lignin and the different groups of life that make it. I guess people had never really looked at the genetics of lignin before, which, to be fair, was 2009. I don't know exactly how much they could have done before this. But, a group of authors took a look at the genetics of producing lignin, and long story short, it seems like basically all photosynthetic eukaryotes, so that's, things more complicated than bacteria, basically, have the genetics to make like the simplest lignols, those lignin substructures, the Legos. They have the genetics to make simple, Legos. And because these genetics seem to be really, really old, like multiple billions, and because they're present in lots of groups that exclusively live in water, like those algae, the original purpose of lignin seems to be support, not so much for moving water, because they live in the water. They don't really need to move water from place to place. They're also usually pretty small. So they don't really use it for moving water like land plants do. That seems to be something that land plants started doing with it once they got up on land. Mm-hmm. So that's lignin. On to wood itself. The first land plants in general were things like mosses that only grow like a few millimeters above the ground. Ballpark 470 million years ago, middle of the Ordovician period, no wood. the first vascular plants, so these are plants that now have tubes for moving stuff around their bodies, things like ferns, for example, now had all these tubes, including lignin, to move nutrients around their bodies so they could grow a bit further up off the ground. Most people, I think, have seen a fern, where it's like they're not on the ground, but they're not a tree. Ballpark, these come around like 420 million years ago in the latest part of the Silurian period, or at least part of the Devonian period. No wood, but now lignin. The earliest evidence of actual wood that we have comes from a few plants kind of all around the same time, so presumably it was around before this. We just don't have it, but sometime in like the middle to late Devonian period, sometime around 385-ish, 370 million years ago, somewhere in there. And fun fact, the earliest known tree is actually from New York State.
Hey.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm in.
It was found down in Schoharie County, which is where SUNY Cobleskill is, if anybody's familiar. This was the first time plants were able to grow more than realistically a few inches off the ground. And I just want you to imagine that for a quick second. The entire world, which at this point was full of quite a lot of invertebrates that had already adapted to life on land. And vertebrates were starting to make those adaptations for life on land as well. And the tallest plant in the world is like less than 2 feet tall. There were some there were some weird, like, really tall fungi around this time, but those were fairly uncommon. For the most part, the plants were not very tall. Like, a dog would be able to see over the top of what would be considered a forest at this time. And so these first woody plants were absolutely enormous compared to their non-woody relatives. Those ones that I mentioned from New York seem like they were about 30 feet tall or so. Which, when all the plants that came before you were like, 2-ish feet tall, that is massive. And even though this part was a little bit confusing to me, so let me know if you want me to try to walk you through this next part again. Even though wood is typically really heavily associated with lignin, it seems like wood itself was developed more for, like, water transport than it does for structural support. I know that's a little contrary to what I said a second ago. I am also kind of confused by this, but I kept seeing both being said confidently, so I don't know. It seems like lignin, more for water, or more for structure. Wood itself, the combination of lignin with the cellulose structure. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Like, I'm willing to go along with it.
Okay. It also, the evidence that I saw them use to sort of support it was that, yes, there were those relatively giant plants at, 30 feet tall, but there were also some early woody plants that were still pretty small. And they're like, well, you don't really need that much support if you're still small. So you were probably using it to move water, but, like, it was probably both. This is just me kind of spitballing and just thinking about how I understand how evolution works. If you're growing bigger, you kind of need both.
Right.
Because if you're growing tall, you need the support to get tall. And also, moving gallons of water 30 feet into the air takes a lot of energy, and you probably want to do that efficiently. So, both.
Yeah, that's kind of what my feeling was as well.
But whatever the reason, the first true forests show up around 370-ish million years ago. And this absolutely changed basically everything on Earth. Like, for example, there were just, like, entire landscapes that just did not exist before this. Like, meandering rivers basically could not exist before this. that is sort of like the stereotypical, like, slow, winding river, like, classic, like, Mississippi River sort of structure before we started, putting up walls against it. Because it is, like, the trunks and roots of trees that, bind the soil that makes it so the river can't just run straight. So, like, there are just entire landscapes and ecosystems that just could not have existed before wood.
I can believe that.
Yeah.
And then another real quick thing to brush over that we don't have a ton of time for. There was a period of time where the world's decomposers, the fungi and insects and things, couldn't really handle all of the lignin that trees were pumping out once trees, like, really got going. Because once, trees sort of got some steam behind them, once they started getting pretty diverse, they just, like, spread out and took over the world. There was a period of time where basically the entire world was rainforest. And that happened a little too quickly. And because lignin is, like, as I mentioned, is inherently has, like, anti-rotting properties.
Mm-hmm.
And so the fungi and the insects hadn't really developed great tools to be able to process and eat lignin from all the dead trees, and that's part of why we have so much coal from the Carboniferous period. Is that normally all those dead trees and plants and things would be broken down by decomposers, and that just kind of wasn't happening, or at least not happening in, like, equilibrium, basically. There are other reasons, but that is a contributing factor.
Thanks, fungi.
Yeah. I mean, okay, coal existing is not
I know.
Inherently bad.
Yeah. I wasn't saying it's bad, I'm just saying.
Yeah.
Thanks to them, we have coal.
Yeah. And so one last thing to sort of cover, wrapping up here, wood with the past. Very early on, like I mentioned, lignin is a class of molecules and it varies from group to group. This is because, like, woodiness and having wood, I kind of mentioned this a little bit when we were talking about how different plants sometimes can be a shrub, sometimes can be a tree. Being a tree does not mean you're related to each other. So for example, like, trees are not like a group of life like mammals or birds. So for example, oak trees are more closely related to grass than they are to pine trees.
That's wrong. No.
Yeah, there are lots of, like, fairly closely related species where it's like, this one's a tree, this other one is a shrub, this other one is, like, herbaceous, but, like, is more structural than, a fern. More along the lines of, like, bamboo-ish or sugarcane. But yeah, like, being a tree and having wood is just something that has happened convergently a ton of times.
Makes sense.
And that's why lignin's really complicated, is because everybody does it differently. Because, say your, family, this family of plants was like, oh, okay, the environmental conditions right now aren't great for tree. I'm going to cut back on my lignin production and be more shrubby. And then, 5-10 million years later, times get better to be tree. They need more lignin. And over time, that just, like, changes the structure of the lignin from group to group as you kind of go around the plant family tree. And lignin's really complicated because it's been, evolved to have more, and then sort of dialed back, and then more, and then dialed back, and so many times. And yeah, trees, again, this is the kind of thing where I'm like, with plants, unless you really know what you're looking at, like, you can look at most mammals and be like, okay, this one's probably more closely related to this other one. But with plants, I got nothing. I have nothing.
And this is why Gavin doesn't like plants.
This is why I don't like plants. Trees, just like in my animal brain, should be more closely related to each other, but they're not, and I hate it. Anywho, that is an insultingly brief history of wood. Like I said, this was an episode where obviously with any episode I could have gotten real lost in the weeds, in the woods, pun intended.
Well done.
Thank you. But like this one was simpler than I thought it was gonna be. And for a plants episode, that makes me happy.
Yes.
But that's all I got. So unless anybody has any else, Mike, go ahead and take us out.
Before I take you out,
yeah,
I'm trying to think here. Like I'm trying to think of how I want to phrase my question, or even just like my thoughts here when it comes to wood. But you really kind of, I guess you brought it up well at the beginning about how wood you cannot tell the story of humanity without wood.
Yeah.
It is like and it's one of the things you don't think about. But if we reran the simulation of Earth and just wood had never developed, man, like what a different
it's
planet
like
we are living on.
And it's like humans even would not look remotely like we do. Like all of the primate features we have are because primates, started out living in trees. That's why we have grabby hands. That's why we have eyes that face forward, and why we have pretty good color vision. And why our arms are so relatively mobile. If you've ever like had a dog like laying on its back and you try to move its arms around, they don't move around like human arms. And all of that is because we lived in trees, which can only exist because of wood.
And Woody episode it has been. This has been episode 168 of I Wish You Were Dead, a podcast about things that used to be alive. My name is Mike, that was Gavin and Fia, and we will see all of you guys in a couple weeks. Until then, take care, everybody.
This episode of I Wish You Were Dead was written by Gavin Davidson and hosted by Gavin Davidson, Mike Bryson, and Finella Campanino. It was sound edited and edited for YouTube by Gavin Davidson. Special thanks to former guests of the pod and to listeners like you.